The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs. Membership is open to senior financial executives including CFOs, financial VPs, and treasurers. We hope that you'll become a member of the Global CFO Council today. To join, please visit the membership tab at globalcfocouncil.com.
I'm going to introduce you. And what this means is I have a picture that I'm going to share of you. And I didn't tell you beforehand. During the introduction, I try to find interesting stuff about you, and I found something interesting about you, and I have a picture. So Matt is awesome, works with Virginia Asset Management, and before that had his own practice. He's been in the game. On the profile, it says 10 plus years, but I'm seeing a little gray on the sides.
Yeah, it's a little bit more than that.
I think you're rounding down, brother, but that's okay.
Right.
That's okay. I'm bald, so I wish I had a little bit of gray on the sides. Before that, I knew that you went to the University of Richmond. Not only did you go there, varsity football scholarship at the University of Richmond, and I think that you were a wide receiver. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep.
And I'm going to share just the cutest little picture of you. Can you see my screen? Look at you in action. And if I'm reading the stats right, in the game, I think I saw about 6 touchdowns, almost 1,000 yards receiving. Rushing, not as strong. I saw 1 year, I saw 3 carries for 51 yards, 17 yards per carry average, pretty solid. But then in 2006, big slip, 1 carry, -1 yards, not as strong.
Yeah, fumble recovery. I remember that.
I didn't bring that up. Hey, I didn't bring that up. But you know what, you are super talented in this area. We're gonna cover a lot of ground. We're gonna cover it quickly. Matt, you can share your screen again. Seriously qualified. Matt is an AIF, a CHFC, a CEPA. I think you're making things up. I don't even think some of those are real, but that's okay. If you speak loudly and make declarative statements, it seems legit. I'm gonna mute myself. Matt, I'm going to be taking notes. I'm going to hit you up multiple times with questions as we go along. Super looking forward to the presentation and really appreciate you speaking with us today.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for the great intro and the flashback to the past. That was, man, it's been a while. But thank you, of course, thanks for having us. On the screen, hopefully you'll see, I am showing the screen, right, Robert? Just technical difficulties. Yeah, as you see our team here, myself, Gib, as well as AJ, who kind of head up the business planning aspect of our firm. And from Jump Street, we've been working with business owners and their executives and key employees to really maximize value. So we're going to talk through that today. Briefly, we're going to hit on a little bit of our schedule. So we'll be coming back a couple times to speak on different topics. We've got kind of a rundown of what you'd like to hear. So if there's something specific you want, let Robert know. We'll certainly address it as we go forward here and throughout the presentation. Specifically today, I'm pretty excited. So ever since, and Robert and I were chatting earlier today, ever since COVID, there's been 2 real key programs that, for whatever reason, we just get asked about a lot or questions come up, and it's this thing around a retention program, key employee retention strategies. The other side is executive compensation for key members and that type of stuff. So we're going to spend almost all of our time talking about that. And of course, I love the feedback, the questions. We've talked about this enough where class interaction and questions from Robert probably guides us in a better situation to what's thinking between your ears. I always like to say, if you're thinking the question, probably 5 other people are, so we can certainly address it as we get going. So there's our contact. After into this, if you have any questions and want to reach out directly, we can do so, but we'll get this going. And if I can find the next one. So this is a little bit about our value prop. I'm not going to read it to you. It'll be in the slides as you get it later. But the idea that we bring to the table is a lot of times we play the position of quarterback, making sure all the business advisors are on the same page. We certainly don't do CFO work. We rely on the CFOs readily to give us feedback of financials and data and help driving value, minimize taxes, and ultimately create financial freedom for its executives, key employees, and the real movers and shakers of those businesses. This is a little slide to kind of illustrate the point. I'm not going to spend time on it, but as you can see, the top line revenue kind of stays the same. Bottom line, we can grow value by increasing multiples. Ultimately, we've got a process to do that, right? Right. We can resolve profit gaps. We have best in class financials. Y'all's job is to drive the revenue higher with your leadership team and make the numbers work. What we really spend a lot of time on is how do we make a business attractive? And if we can make a business attractive, it increases our multiples down the road. For larger corporations, the two things what we've seen to make business attractive as well as profitable are those key employee retention programs. So we're going to talk through those really out of all of the stuff today and kind of focus in on that. Here's the schedule coming out, right? So we have April 10th today, going through some stuff. There's an in-person in Greenville, May 28th, 26th, and you'll get the updates and topics as we go along throughout the program, or you'll get the emails from Robert. All right, the format. So I'll briefly go through about 3 things, and then seeing how we're all very smart individuals on the phone, the best format I've seen to come out of this for something y'all can take away and really kind of hone in on yourself is it's kind of funny, but it's through an Excel sheet, right? I've got case examples that we want to walk through and show you. I'll talk through some of our own situations of how it applies. And we'll go through the pros and cons on a high level. And I think those case studies we want to spend most of the time on looking at. So, but the real question is, why the key employee and executive comp, right? For the key employee, right, these programs are above and beyond your basic. There's been numerous studies that an employee is looking for your group benefits, your group health, group life, group disability, 401k plans, if you're smaller, simple SEP, something like that. That's a base entry level, right? That's not a differentiator anymore. It's almost a standard. You need to have something in place to have to even be somewhat competitive. If you don't have it, you're the odd one out. So what really your movers and shakers and key people are looking for is what's the extra? What's the real benefit? And so what we've tried to decide, and we see a lot of this coming out, is really these key people and executives and stuff on the compensation side, on the key employee side, is they just want a game plan, right? They want to know, if I do X, how do I get paid Y? Right? In our world, and you're going to hear it maybe a couple of times, the biggest key to these things are aligning compensation with action. So that's the hardest part. The numbers, we're all really smart people. Numbers make sense. Words don't make so much sense to me, but numbers do, right? The hardest part is figuring out what is that action that this key person can drive to increase net income, right? We can't pay gross. We got to pay net. What can increase net income that also can drive a higher value of something beyond their 401k or their profit share and stuff like that. So we'll talk through a couple examples. It also allows your key people to have maybe a piece of the company pie, right? So the larger the firm gets, maybe there's more hands in the cookie jar of ownership, right? You may have some PE money that came in recently that's an abundance now, right? Private equity money is flourished. There's cash everywhere. So there may be a lot of ownership in there, but you have this key person you want to reward like an owner or at an exit, or just reward in general that may not give up stock ownership, right? You may have a family-owned business that's a really large family-owned business that, right, that family has been, it's a third generation. No one else is ever going to own it, but you want to reward kind of the executive, the CFO that maybe not be family or somebody else like they're an owner to share in those profits. So those are the plans we'll talk about today. It, of course, provides an incentive plan to grow. And then if done properly, we're not going to get into too much structure of things, right? That could take 2 weeks if we did, because there's all different business structures, and for C corps and LLCs and S corps and pass throughs, and sometimes you maybe want to have a C corp and an S corp. So there's also, just keep in mind, by having these plans, we're going to talk about some of them, they can also be very tax beneficial to companies, right? And that's the key, right? I always say I can spend my own dollars better than the IRS can. So if we can keep Uncle Sam out of our pocket, that's always a good thing legally. So, all right. So the benefits for the owners to consider, we kind of talked about it. What would actually motivate it? Surprisingly or not, a lot of key employees aren't looking as compensation as a form of motivation. I haven't seen anyone ever turn down compensation, if that makes sense. So also keep that in mind. I think a lot of people are just looking for, what is the pathway of how do I get to the next level? And if we keep that on how we actually go through stuff, and I'll talk through some examples as we go along. All right. So 2 programs I want to show. I can stop right there for questions if anybody has any so far.
I do. I got hit with like 5. So I have a question just on the previous slide. The last bullet point on the last slide said, reduce risk if a key employee dies or is disabled.
Mm-hmm.
How do one of these programs do that?
Yeah. So if they're truly key to the organization, right? You've got everybody on this call is key to your organization. As a CFO, you're in charge of a lot of stuff. So 1 or 2 things you can do, right? There's always, right, when we're talking about creating value, there's this phrase I like to coin. It's called systematize your special, right? What do you do that's special that you can put systems around that someone else could step into your place and continue doing the level of work that you are? Now, sometimes that's not the case, right? Sometimes we just can't do that. So if you have a mover and shaker, a critical thinker, everyone on this call, right? If something happens in the form of a death unexpectedly or disability, the business could suffer, right? The larger you are, maybe not so much, but right, you're 50 to 100 million gross revenue, anything over 100 million plus, maybe not so much on a 1-person leave, but think of everything you do to replace that person. So that's where some supplemental programs of executive benefits paid by the company, like a key man life insurance or a key man disability policy, company paid, that if something happened to the critical thinker, mover, shaker, key person, there's economic benefit to the corporation to replace that person, right? If everything we can do, right? Cash flow is king. And in our world, if we can do some planning ahead where we're not so reliant on cash flow, because cash flow, I don't know, could drop like maybe it did in 2020, depending on your industry. If we can think ahead and use surplus cash flow or use other dollars, that just allows more room for capital growth to reinvest back into the business. So yeah, good question.
Question number 2 is, you talked about the importance of strategic alignment with the corporate strategy, with the business, that was really key. And you led rightfully so with financial, but the question is, what about non-financial? You ever seen non-financial but key strategic metrics as part of deferred compensation, a long-term incentive program, etc.?
Yeah, good question. So on non-financial stuff, I don't see it nearly as much. I do see non-financial alignment with the corporation, right? Like a values-based leadership, that aligns your culture really well, right? If we're on a bus and we're values and our alignment are heading this way, and we've got people trying to go this way, there's always going to be that clash. I haven't seen actual dollars and cents go along with that, but I would imagine that if you're the people clashing, you may not be the one that may be in the key area that you're driving to the overall arching leadership values picture. So no, I mean, mostly we're seeing, what can this person do to drive income up for the company, region, store, whatever that looks like, to then increase the net income. And if I can increase as a key person net income, I will take a share of that.
Yeah. Matt, you talked about how this can be part of many private companies at some point may want to sell, there may want to be an exit, not only to run the business to just have great results, but it also, something like these programs could make the business more attractive. And there was a question when you said that is what specifically about these key employee retention programs is specifically attractive that buyers look for? And then also, I thought, I'm going to add to their question, anything specifically not attractive to buyers? Like there's a type of deferred compensation long-term incentive program that, say, you mentioned private equity money, so much private equity money is out there searching for a business. Anything on the far opposite spectrum is like, guys, if you have this, you got to get rid of it, or absolutely don't consider XYZ because private equity or buyers in general hate this thing that some people consider. Talk to me on both sides of the good and the bad.
Yeah, the easy one, I'll have to come back to the one. I haven't seen much that if you're doing X, the only thing if that buyers don't necessarily like if you're doing is not having operations, not basically think if I'm a third party, right? Here's the best example. If I'm a third party trying to buy a business and I buy that business and then the owners may stay on for 2 or 3 years in transition, but the owners are gone after that. I need that business to operate the same way because that's what I'm buying, right? So what I think somebody like me, if I'm trying to buy a business or a company trying to buy a business, they need the operations to stay intact of doing the thing, systematizing their special. That if somebody left, like the CEO who may be majority owner, whatever job responsibilities, relationships that person had also stays within the business to continue. I think that would be key. And on the other side, the benefits of a key employee, we work with quite a bit of actually with some private equity companies who have us come in. And if you think about this, so we'll get into the numbers here in a second, but let's just fast forward and say we have a key employee retention program set up. And the overarching gist is, hey, you do above and beyond work. We're going to set aside X amount because you did Y, but we're going to handcuff you for 10 years. It's going to be a 10-year vesting, right? If you're in year 3 and I go to sell a company and I have 10 key people, and those 10 key people above their 401k profit share have an extra $3-4 million in a personal wealth in another account that ties them to the company. During a transition, more than likely, they're going to stay with that company. So you're tying that leadership in and keeping the wheel turning, if you will, on a third-party exit. And that's the key. That's what we look for. That's what would increase the multiple. That's what helps drive the value as well.
If my boss watches this video, $10 million would get me to stay for 10 years.
That's right.
So I want that noted in my permanent file. The last question for this segment, I'm holding the 4 others that I've already gotten, so they'll come towards the end. People don't panic. Yep. But one more question. When you said you could be the odd man out and don't have a program like this, I got a question about how do you know if your competitors have these programs? Oftentimes they're confidential. You don't know unless you're trying to hire somebody from a competitor. Yeah. How do you benchmark to see if the competition has a program like this and at what level? How can you find out if you're the odd man out?
Yeah, on these, and we'll get into it, but this program specifically, I don't know, because it's not an ERISA program, right? So this is what the great thing about it, and this is kind of leading into the example I'll show you, is it's the Wild West, right? So if you're, as a CFO, you probably have to sign off on a 5,500, or maybe your HR director does, but at some point you have some involvement with a 401k plan. You are bound by ERISA law. There's rules in place. You can't benefit but so much to X amount of people. Really, the only rule in place on a deferred comp plan is you just can't benefit everyone. Other than that, it's the wild, wild west of how you design. So figuring out who has them, it could be tricky because there's not a database of them. I would just suggest if you have surplus cash flow, and your company's doing well and you want your key people to partake in that, I would strongly suggest looking into designing one. Because as y'all know already, to replace, hire, and train a new key person is going to cost you 10 times that as it is to just create a program that makes them want to stay.
I love it, Matt. I'm holding questions. I'm going to mute myself. I'll hit you back up at our next break with some other stuff. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. So the first step, so there's two programs, right? So there's two programs in this key employee executive bonus program, right? The first is a short-term benefit, right? So we're looking through, it's called a rolling bonus. The second is that longer-term deferred comp executive bonus phantom stock program over here. But let's focus on the short term, right? So having both is kind of a good thing. We have a large financial planning firm here in Richmond, Raleigh, Charlotte, in the Mid-Atlantic. We do thousands. We focus on business owners, but our team does thousands of individual financial plans. I can't tell you how many employees will wait to collect their bonus to leave you and be gone. Like they'll wait until that bonus check hits and then be gone the next day. So one of the things what we've developed and wanted to structure is this rolling bonus program. And Robert, I don't know if you can see my screen. I can't see you can, the Excel sheet, perfect. So one of the is a rolling bonus where we put vesting schedules on the bonus. So we set the metrics, right? So the key here is aligning compensation with action, right? We're all smart people on this call. Numbers are the easy part. What they do to drive competition or drive actually revenue is going to be a whole lot different. It's going to be business to business. One of the programs we did on this particular person was a large, it's kind of funny. They do fence work. They use large commercial fencing, right? And during their fence work, what would happen is they would order supplies and they're supposed to have multiple warehouses throughout the Mid-Atlantic to where they store the supplies. Well, that's not what was happening. What was happening is the crew would go out, they'd trash the supplies that they didn't use, not store them. And so they're always using this inventory. So they hired a manager to drive revenue, right? So this was an example of just one of the warehouse managers, and they base it on total net income of the area, location, store. But the idea was the person is smart enough. They see the books, they see the revenue. Their goal is to drive it. So pretty consistently, and I'll show you how this works. And right, we can sub this stuff out however way, but pretty consistently, the net income of this location was about $500,000, right? I'll zoom in for here. The goal was the bonus program is based on net income. What we designed and structured is said, okay, if the baseline is 500, the goal is to this manager to drive it above 500. Well, if you drive net income above 500, we're going to bonus you 2% on a 10% growth, 3% on a 20, 4% on a 30, right? So for this example, baseline net income is 500. So any growth above that plus the 1% is their bonus. So 1% of the actual net income is $6,000. 600,000 is a 20% growth of 500. So they get 3% on the 100. So their bonus for this year is a total of $9,000. Right. So now for time's sake, we can play this out. I've picked some good years. Next year, let's say they grow really well. And year 2, baseline still stays 5, 1% of the actual net income, 6,500. They had a killer year, grew 30%. So they get 4% on the 150. Now their bonus is 1,250, right? 12,500. Then we carry it on year 3, year 4, year 5. But here's the catch. We're not paying this bonus out in year 1. It's a rolling vesting schedule. So those same bonuses are going to be up here in year 2. We pay them out over 3 years, right? So even though the employee earned the $9,000 bonus year 1, the bonus pool, they're going to get $3,000 year 1, $3,000 year 2, $3,000 year 3. Now you can make it 5 years, you can make it 2 years, you can make it 6. They just decided for 5, right? Remember the big year, 12,500 goes up to year 2. That was their bonus. But in year 2, instead of 12,500, they get 7,125. That is in itself, if they left you after year 2, here's the biggest benefit. If they left you after year 2, this person theoretically earned 11,250. They're leaving on the table. So you start accumulating these rolling bonuses, and it creates an incentive that, hey, I know exactly what I need to do to drive revenue higher. And if I drive revenue higher, my bonus goes higher. I know I can't get access to it, but on the company side, it's a vesting schedule, so they don't have to pay it all out in year 1. So it helps cash flow. And then they start creating this running total that hopefully would continue going up. Now I'm going to stop right there because I'm going to tell you, if this person's salary is 78,000, they were a small warehouse manager. So this person's salary is 78,000, and they're used to getting a $6,000 to $7,000 bonus. You can't go to them year 1 and say, hey, now you're only going to get 3. You've kind of got to merge a plan like this into some other things, right? Where they don't necessarily take a step down. But hopefully this just gives you an idea that you can vest your bonus. So 2 things I would strongly encourage. Like, sometimes people want cash now. Some people value cash later, but we want to make sure that the cash is good for the cash flow of the company. Maybe vest some of it. And then make sure that the employees themselves don't necessarily take a step back, but they have a clear path to earn more. And by earning more, we're looking at net income. Just an example, we can carve it up 20 different ways. We can do 6 years. But we are seeing a lot of the rolling bonus programs look like this, right? Especially for maybe some younger key people who may not value a longer term benefit, who maybe you could drive a sales revenue from it, or inventory maintenance, or supply ordering. I mean, you name it. There's multiple ways to kind of work this out. The key there is, the hard part is figuring out what does that person do and how does that person drive revenue for the company, and then attaching those metrics to it.
Is this a good spot to hit you with some more questions?
It is on this one because I want to spend a lot of time on the actual deferred comp, because I think that would be probably more advantageous for a lot of people. Yeah.
I'm going to hit you rapid fire. So one,
all right,
numero uno is, I want to push back a little bit on the salary.
Mm-hmm.
When I think of key employees, I think of very senior leadership.
Yep.
And not every manager in the organization, because most of them don't have any authority to control net income. And I also just don't want, as an accountant, I don't want to maintain a long-term incentive program for 50 people or 100 people.
Yep.
I also don't think if you're a certain age, money out in future years is only almost imaginary. It's like, if it's not, I remember being 25 years ago, and like next year was imaginary. I didn't think I was going to live to be 26. So I was like, who cares? It's fake money. So talk to me, did you hit 78 because you just like that, that's your favorite number? Or are there companies who have long-term incentive programs for a warehouse manager making $78,000? Am I crazy? Your thoughts about like the level of leadership that you really thinking about?
Yeah, good question. I probably should start out. So this is not your executive type program, long-term incentive program. This is if I have a group of people, whether it's lower managers, employees in general, that are continuously leaving me, how do we incentivize, or how do we create a different plan that may keep money on the table, that if they do leave you, we're not paying, we have more money to hire and maybe pay a bonus to someone else, and then hire that replacement. And if they do leave you, you just kind of keep some of the cash and give them some like teeth in the game to maybe not. So a lot of times, maybe you're young, starting out manager may start here and then venture to the long-term incentive plan that we'll get to next. But yeah, I can add a 0 here on all the numbers if we need to.
No, it makes perfect
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Another question, and was around, do you know if there's, I got multiple questions I'm trying to merge into one around the same thing. It was, you talked about, you used the word earned. So I think that keyed up a few questions. The bonus was earned. And so is there any obligation to pay even if they leave? Maybe even in particular states, California seems to always have their own special weird rules where, yeah, you can call it deferred, but if it, unless it's written a certain way, or it doesn't matter how it's written, certain things are just have to be paid under certain circumstances in some states. Coach me up on how enforceable or tripwires you need to worry about when people do leave and they're not fully vested.
Correct. Yeah. So that's where you have to have a strong document up front. That's where I'll be honest with you, every state employment laws may be a little bit different. There may be some that's very similar. That's where I'm not going to step in an attorney's lane. And that's where I would check with labor laws to make sure you can document it correctly so that everything's above board. That's half our battle, right? That's pulling the CPA, that's pulling the attorney, the CFO, that's everyone doing the planning work for the company. But yeah, that's good question. I don't know the labor laws of all 50 states, of course.
Okay.
But that's what I would check that out for sure.
What about in a circumstance where that key employee that you're trying to retain, they might be a little more senior than you and I, nearing retirement? Are there exceptions that you have to make for somebody? You're trying to put them in a 7-year LTIP, but they're 65 or they're 62 or something, and they're not going to be here 7 years. So do you have to make special considerations for retirement and this whole earned?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, and that's going to be more on the second plan I'll show you. Honestly, that's going to be more over here. So if you have someone senior, again, you can create an incentive plan, but let's say a good example. You've got someone 65 who you want to incentivize them for 2 years and they want to be out in 67, right? It's more of like a severance package at that point, promise to pay after they retire from 67 that you can incentivize them. So you've got somebody, I want them to do X, they can drive XYZ revenue. They're not a stockholder, but they're a key person. We're going to pay you, if you hit these metrics, we'll pay you $150,000 a year for the next 3 years after you hit 67. Those are the types of programs you can do on the later, so you don't have a time to accumulate the funds. Correct. Yep.
Last question for this phase, and I love it. When you said the word net income, my eyes lit up. I have gotten in the longest and most heated arguments in my life over what I meant by the phrase net income. And you and I could sit here and argue for an hour. So, and I got a question about that. Like, how do you define this or that? And that can mean different things to different people. And so I think the question is, I bet you need to be really, really clear with definitions, clearly defined illustrations and appendixes. I think this member brought up a really great question, and I bet these type of things are really important to avoid misunderstanding, arguments, litigation. Talk to me a little bit about defining key terms when you're talking about people's pockets. They're going to really care about every word.
Yeah, that's again where each company needs to surround themselves with that good team where they can analyze that, right? I bet you there's 20 different definitions of net income on this call today. So it's going to be case by case. I don't think there's a gold standard unless you're a publicly traded company looking at GAAP accounting method, right? So there's some standards out there, but we would need to rely on you guys, the CFO, maybe an accounting firm, attorneys, HR, to kind of draft that up for sure.
All right, Matt, I'm gonna mute myself again. I got 5 questions. I'm gonna hold in my quiver or tool belt. I don't know where I'm holding it, but I'm holding it.
All right. Perfect. So then this is the long-term incentive plan. So this is the deferred comp, call it what you will. Sometimes if you're large enough, you can classify them under 409A. There's some other things. This is the non-ERISA plan where you can pick key people and create a benefit for them down the future. Now, there's two parts to this plan, right? Keep in mind, there's the design document of the plan of what the company will do. And then there's the funding. You can design the plan. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can design the plan without funding it and fund it through cash flow. So here's some good examples. Example one, hey, key employee, you're 55 years old. You've gone above and beyond for this company. While it's a family-owned company, we're not giving out stock. We're going to do something for you, right? Because you've done X, we're going to put aside money for the next 10 years until you hit age 65. And when you retire from here, above your 401k, profit share, and personal assets, we're going to pay you out $200, $250 a year for the next 5 years, from 65 to 70, right? That's your incentive to stay. We're going to put a 10-year vesting on it. So if you leave us early, we're going to pay you out a smaller percentage of that, but that's a incentivized plan to stay with us. So then when you retire at 67 or 65, sorry, it's 55-year-old, you're not having to tap into as much of your personal assets, right? We can bridge a gap to Social Security. It elevates their own personal plan. It gives them a skin in the game on profits. You can align how much you put into these things with what the profits are. And that's the design mechanism of it, right? Because they're key, you could also throw an insurance on this that says, hey, if you pass away before you actually retire, insurance will come in and pay the company. We'll fully vest it and pay it out to your family. We'll retain some of the insurance to hire your replacement. There's all kind of these nuances we can do. Think of the wild, wild west on these programs. We've designed them all sorts of different ways. So when you look at it, then there's the funding of it, right? The smart thing would be, let's actually set aside some extra dollars, right? In our world, having businesses with plans like this that retain key people with a 10-year vesting or whatever vesting is huge on the multiple, on exiting, but it's also good to leverage dollars where 1 + 1 = 3 because of compounded growth. Maybe not so much right this second with the market going turmoil, but right over the long term, the compounded rates of return, compounded growth, we want to use, if I'm paying out $1 million to an executive 10 years from now, if I set aside 200 grand today, I can invest the 200 to make sure it matches. And so that's the stuff we want to look at. So in this example, this is all the composite years. It's easier to do it as a client by client. So there's 7 different key executives. Add a 0, depending on what your cash flow level is of your company, right? If you're a larger company, add a 0 to all these numbers. If you're a smaller company, this may work. But this person's a good example, right? So this person is 55 years old. We develop the plan. We say, hey, you're key. You go above and beyond. If you hit these metrics, we're going to put $30,000 a year into an account for the next 10 years. And when you retire, let's say 66, we're going to pay you out 100 grand a year, right? So now what happens is the money can or cannot, it mostly stays on the company balance sheet, right? We put money in, it gets invested, right? I just use a 6% rate of return. As the money accumulates, person decides to retire. Here's what one of the tax benefits is. The $100,000 that's paid to the former employee is a payroll tax expense. The money that's coming in here is just the company's dollars that is, depending on what your structure is, either capital gains structure, it's retained on the balance sheet. And it's just an asset of the corporation to fund this liability down the road. So balance sheet looks good. It could also be used for if you fall on hard times. If cash flow gets tight, right, we can tap into it a little bit and promise to pay later. The company could also say, on this program like this, it's a 10-year vest, right? So if the client leaves or your key person leaves at 57, they can be a 30% vested in this dollar figure. So 30% of 90 is called 27,000. You can still pay it out at retirement. So you can still hold that liability. You may want to if it's that small, but if it's a large number, you may want to hold it. But you can design this however you want. I emailed Robert, he'll send it out, but a sample Word document of what a language could be. From vesting schedules, I've seen as high as 15 years, as low as 5. But the vesting schedule and the payout don't have to line up, right? We worked with a large restaurant business in the Mid-Atlantic. They have locations everywhere. They did this for their CFO, COO, CEO, were one level. Then the level down, they did this, and they wanted to, because in the restaurant business, right, most people don't wait till 65 to retire just from wear and tear on their bodies. So instead of 65 retirement, they said 55, or whenever the employee chooses, right? So you can also fit with the greater of, retirement chosen by the employee or age 55 is a minimum age to hit before that occurs. And so you can add all these different trinkets to customize these plans yourself. And so you have, let's say, 7 employees, right? If someone's 55 years old, to pay them out $100,000 after retirement for the next 5-6 years, right? It's going to take about 30,000, right? $300,000 in funding. But if they're younger, right, at 43, if you do the same funding level, there's just a longer time for the accumulation of the wealth. So, right, instead of $500,000, now we're looking at 1.8 million. That's on the company's balance sheet. That sometimes, right, your lenders like, and then this benefit continues to grow, right? We can pay out 150 and then retain a pretty good cash flow on the balance sheet as well. Sometimes if you want to add them, if they're really key and you want to add a death benefit feature to grow with it, I know a lot of executives have that. Right, I think it was Michigan. God, I'm drawing a blank, but the football team Michigan did the same program for one of the brothers. One coaches the NFL. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank. I'll talk about it later.
Is it Hargrove?
Harbaugh, that's it. Yeah. That's it. Thank you, Robert, for bailing me out. And so you can add these up, right? So, right, so you have employee 3. So a 35-year-old, I threw this example in there because maybe when they turn 54, you stop funding, right? So I'm just assuming a 6% growth rate. But if we've had growth rates like we've had the last 5 years, minus the last 2 weeks, right? Maybe we don't have to fund it to hit our obligation. So that goes back to just an ongoing maintenance. And then they could pay it out over time, but it's all corporate dollars stayed on the balance sheet, and paying it out is like a severance payroll deduction for the company, get the tax deduction. So you add this up over time, and then you can do a composite. So this example, $200,000 a year cash outlay. If you're a large company, add a 0, 2 million. If you're smaller, this may work. And then you can start accumulating the cash value in your investments, right? That can be mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, bonds. It doesn't have to be NVIDIA, although if you did it 10 years ago, that'd been a great call. But it doesn't have to be just a single stock. Diversified risk management. It can be treasuries, right? We want to kind of have that well-diversified portfolio out. But this is what I call the engine. It's going to drive these payouts. And so you get the ledger, and it's the long-term incentive plan for your key people. This is for the top people that may not get stock, or maybe you've had an acquisition of private equity that came into the company that the treasury stock is all getting ran out. And maybe this is like a phantom stock funding that if you ever went to exit, you can build a sinking fund to pay out like a stock benefit. All that fun stuff that can be wrapped up into this, what I call the Swiss Army knife of plans. Now, I know there's probably going to be a couple of questions, and I'll get into tax benefits, but there are ways, just keep in mind, there are ways, depending if you're a C Corp, S Corp, LLC, if you're a C Corp borrowing money, maybe you want an S Corp, there are different ways to, maybe you want taxes to be taken out on the front end, so you get the tax deduction now, but you may have to pay later, or you can reverse it. Maybe I want to pay the tax and the corporation pays it after tax today, especially if the corporate rate's 21%. We don't know what it's going to be later. And we get the tax-free benefits later. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail stuff. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to chat with you or email me. But I'd need a little bit know more about the situation. Yeah. All right. 15 minutes for questions. I like it.
All right, I'm gonna hit you up. Some of these are mine. So first, and the first question is just because I have like a sample size of one guy doing, one career of accounting, and you've been doing hundreds, thousands of these. So I'm just interested to challenge an assumption I have in my own bias. So with these deferred compensation programs, I've found the cash value insurance to be a beneficial program to fund these, because the CEOs, the owners of these private mid-market firms, they kind of forget they set this up, and they don't like using some of the profits to fund this every year. That seems like voluntary. That seems kind of discretionary. Last year when we put this program, that's in the past. I didn't think it would affect this year, but if it's a bill I get from an insurance company, I just got to stroke it. I got to go. It's set.
Yep.
Boom. And then the death benefit for the death benefit for me. Oh, the cash value, the da da da. I know it's expensive. I got to pay. They're not doing it for free. It's not a nonprofit, but I kind of lean that way. Versus I'm going to call it like self-funded. I don't know what the right word is. What say you?
Yeah. Situational. It depends on each situation, right? So the cash value life insurance is a good key to do it. All right. Even in the cash value, you can buy an S&P 500 fund and variable policy, so you can get growth there. The good thing there is you're deferring the tax on the growth, right? So you're not paying on the internal engine. However, you are paying a cost of insurance. So I guess two things, usually what we ask is say, is it important that if your key person passes away, do you want to make this plan complete? Right? So if you put this plan and say, I'm going to promise to pay $1 million out over 5 years when you retire, do you want to complete that plan if they pass away in year 2 to the family as a perk? If that's the case, you may need insurance, right? If there's a need for insurance, building it in the cash value is a good idea. However, I'm not going to say it's the only idea. Typically what we see, because there's restrictions of insurance, right? Accessing the funds may be tied up. Generally, we see a corporate investment account also be created for liquidity. Because instead of mutual funds and ETFs, you can buy individual stocks, securities, treasuries, notes. You can be a little bit more diversified, a little bit, I'm not going to say better, but a little bit more sophisticated wealth management tools in a corporate investment account. But then the downside is you're living in cap gain world on any qualified dividends, maybe ordinary interest. So we have to be careful and monitor the two. One has more liquidity and more fluid investment options. The other one has better tax benefits, but less access. So there's no right or wrong answer. We've developed them and designed them and run them both ways. It's just more of a what fits the company's need at that time. And sometimes they change over back and forth. Yeah.
Question number 2 is back to the LTIP, right? A little broader group maybe to think about, to include in it. And this is another where this is just Robert Bendetti's thought, and I want to be challenged. Is I have found in my vast experience of one that people hate the merge, but like the idea of an additional bonus. They like, we're also going to have an LTIP, and wanted to murder me when I said we're going to switch to a long-term incentive program. So I know that's more expensive, but I found a lot of pushback from folks that we're going to switch from getting paid now to getting paid over 3 years. Get out of here. I hate this guy. To adding, even if it's a smaller LTIP, adding it, everybody's my new best friend at work.
Yeah, we've seen similar scenarios. So if it's really someone you want to retain and hold on to, we very rarely is it either or, it's in addition to. So keep that in mind. And that's why it's so important that in addition to is driven by action that person can take to drive the bottom line. I'm not going to use the net income word. I'm going to say bottom line.
And maybe I got 3 more questions. I may have just one more, so I'm picking one. I'm going to try to get to another. Is a communication. Matt, if the CEO is hearing you and thinks it's a great idea, she can just make it happen. But we as CFOs, if we want to make a change to a current plan, or we want to start this new plan, like we get it fired up, like your ideas are better than our current plan, or we have nothing and we should have something. Man, I got to get HR involved. I got to get the CEO involved. I got to get the board involved. Talk to me about best practices of communication. We fired these folks up and they're going to go do something about it. How do you, what's best practices around communication?
Yeah, that's going to be, so the best practice for this particular plan, and it has multiple uses, but of overarching theme, just think of, we have less regulation on ERISA from these plans. So if you have a lot of high income earners, when I'm saying you've got a bunch of people knocking down north of 750 of income, 500 of income, right? 401k profit sharing probably isn't hitting your personal financial goals of just saving the 30 grand a year. Adding this as a layer on top of it, gets you the tax benefits if you wanted it on the front end, which you probably needed if you're making that much money. But it also gets the CEO the ability to do the same thing for themselves. And then it gets HR to do the same thing for any other higher upper management to do the same thing. Right. So I would use a lot of it as a tax play, as well as, hey, XYZ CEO, if you're ever thinking about third party, not that you are, because I don't know if you want to have that conversation. We need to retain. We need to retain these people. Our 401k profit share is not retaining them. We need a program like this to make sure we have an incentive plan that is vested, that we can put teeth, that if they leave us after exit, right? So those are the 2 I've seen that has worked the best. Using the tax benefits of these plans, which we didn't go over much, but there are a lot of them in there, as well as, right, just locking down your key people for an exit.
All right, that was good. That was a quick answer. I'm getting one more out of you for extra credit.
Okay.
Great question from a member around, this horizon. We're talking 5, 7, 10 years. Some businesses don't have a 5-year horizon. A lot of executives, the actual average tenure of executives is 3 to 5 years. And it's not necessarily because they're leaving. It's just businesses change, get acquired. And when they get acquired, the compensation programs change. Like how that 3 to 5 years, our parents, they worked somewhere 20 years. Companies were around. That's a really long time horizon. And so how do you implement these plans in that kind of environment? Are there design program that you put flexibility into programs? Talk to me a little bit about horizons, timing.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. So it depends, of course, on the company, but let's throw out a couple examples, right? You have CEO's job comes in, or leadership team, leadership comes into a new company and their job is to get it ready to exit in 5 years, right? You can put some short-term incentives that vest in 5 to get cash now. You can create a plan like this that would vest. So instead of getting stock, you'll just get the cash at exit based on the value. 5 years doesn't give you a lot of time for market growth, but you can just start setting aside cash. You could also do a longer time frame, even if you plan to exit, to retain the people in the company that need to be retained. So maybe the C-suites get their exit through the phantom stock program, or maybe they get equity to driving it up, right? Getting it ready to sell in 5 years, driving multiples and all that fun stuff. Maybe then the layer down has programs like this because they're going to retain on to the new company. And the new company wants to keep them, so they're not going to get rid of this program. And if they do, you can write it in the language of they get just cashed out, you vest immediately, right? You can add language of, if there's ever a third party transaction, you get immediately vested in the investment account that gets paid out. Now there's some tax ramifications around that, so just gotta be careful of that. But you can absolutely create the flexibility on a 2-year person, right? 2-year CEO, all the way to a 20-year, whatever you need.
I love it. This is fantastic. I got like multiple pages of notes. Matt, you brought it. I love it. I think I love that driving the bottom line results and this long-term horizon of a program like this. I'm aligning my leadership team with not today and tomorrow, but next year, not just
Yeah.
I love that focus. I wrote down systematize your special. The first time I repeat that, I'm going to give you credit, and then from after that, it's just going to be like, as Robert Bendetti always says, systematize your special. And then what a key reminder how expensive it is to hire new talent. So let's retain, right? Let's train and retain the talent that we have, because it's so, and who knows, it's what the next person is going to be like. I'm going to add to that, by equipping people to retire gracefully that are really great and they're going to go out with a bang, is way better than retiring in place. People who are not prepared financially and the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years of their career are terrible. They're just sitting around doing nothing, but they just need a paycheck. Or you could set them up in a program to go out in a bang, crushing it the last 5 years, and you're getting unbelievable results out of them while they're in that season of their life. I love that. And guys, you don't have to do this alone. This was a lot. I'm going to send out the presentation. I'm also going to send out Matt's contact information. You're going to need a team to do this, as you're going to need internal team, HR, CEO, board. External, you're going to need partners like Matt. Matt, thank you for bringing it. This was fantastic. A little taste of some really great topics. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Have a great day, everybody.